thought it was just a typo. Or maybe I told myself that, because it was easier than stopping what I was doing and asking him to reprint the page. The paper had that thin, official feel to it. Not the kind you keep, the kind you hand over and forget. It slid out of the envelope stiffly, still holding the shape it had been folded into. I remember flattening it with the side of my hand on the kitchen table. Just once. Then again, slower, as if the crease might resist. My name was wrong. Not misspelled in an obvious way, just slightly off. An extra letter where there shouldn't be one. The kind of mistake someone makes when they're sure they already know how your name goes and don't bother checking. I smoothed the paper flat anyway. My son stood near the counter, scrolling through his phone. He hadn't sat down. His jacket was still on. That detail stayed with me because it meant he didn't plan to stay long. He was waiting for something to finish, not beginning anything. "I need you to sign at the bottom," he said, without looking up. I turned the page so the signature line faced me. The wrong name sat at the top, printed neatly, already decided. It wasn't asking. It wasn't tentative. It was just there. I picked up the pen. The pen skipped at first. It was running low on ink. I pressed harder than I meant to. My signature came out thicker than usual. Heavier. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. "You already submitted this?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "Online. This is just for the file. For the file." That phrase made it feel smaller than it was, like it didn't matter, because the real version had already gone somewhere official, somewhere untouchable. I nodded. That was my first mistake, though I didn't think of it that way then. The school logo was printed in the corner. I remember thinking they'd changed it since my children were young. Everything looked softer now. Rounded edges, friendly fonts, as if that made the process gentler. I signed. He took the paper back quickly, like there was no reason for it to stay between us. He folded it along the same creases it already had. The wrong name disappeared inside the fold. "Thanks, Mom," he said. I watched him tuck it into his bag. I wanted to say something then. Not about the name, exactly. About the fact that I hadn't been asked. About how I'd found out after the decision was already made. But those thoughts didn't have words yet. They were just a pressure behind my ribs, easy to ignore if I stood up and started rinsing my mug. "She starts next Monday," he added. That was how I learned the date. I kept my back to him while the water ran. The sink made its usual sound. A hollow echo. It filled the pause so neither of us had to. I felt the moment pass. I let it. Later, after he'd gone, I took the trash out. The envelope he'd brought the form in was still on top. I hadn't thrown it away earlier. I didn't want it to look like I was in a hurry. I don't know who I thought might notice. I stood there longer than I needed to, holding the lid open. Then I dropped it in. The next morning, I told myself it wasn't important. Names get typed wrong all the time. Schools are busy. Forms are rushed. If it mattered, someone would catch it. That thought felt reasonable, comforting, even. It let me go about my day without adjusting anything, but small things started to line up differently after that. When my son called later in the week, he didn't ask if I was free to come to the orientation. He told me what time it was, where to park. He said it would be easier if I met them there instead of riding together. Easier for whom? I wasn't sure. At the school, the hallway smelled like fresh paint. Someone had tried to make it welcoming with posters taped crookedly along the walls. I stood near the doorway while parents gathered in loose groups, leaning toward each other in ways that suggested shared routines. My son arrived with my granddaughter a few minutes late. She ran ahead of him, her shoes lighting up as she went. I smiled without meaning to. That part still came naturally. He caught up to me near the classroom door. "They already have the paperwork," he said, before I could ask. "You don't need to do anything." I nodded again. Inside, the teacher handed out name tags. She moved down the row, writing quickly, confident in her spelling. When she reached my granddaughter, she glanced at her list. "Grandmother's name?" she asked, pen hovering. I said my name. She frowned just slightly, then wrote something else. I didn't see what. "That's what I have here," she said, like she was reassuring me. I didn't correct her. I sat through the rest of the orientation with my hands folded in my lap. My son answered questions when they came up. He seemed relaxed, comfortable, like someone who knew the order of things. On the drive home, he talked about schedules, pickup times, emergency contacts. He spoke as if agreement had already happened somewhere I hadn't been. I listened. I said okay where it was expected. That night, I took out an old folder from the drawer where I keep important papers, birth certificates, vaccination records, things people bring to me when they need them. I'd always been the one who knew where things were. I flipped through it slowly. My name was spelled correctly on every page. I closed the folder and put it back. I didn't feel angry. Not exactly. It was more like realizing you've been standing slightly to the side of where you thought you were, and no one tells you, because it doesn't change their path. Over the next few days, I noticed how often information arrived already settled. Times, places, decisions, always shared politely, always after. When I asked a question, my son answered it fully. He wasn't hiding anything. That almost made it harder to name. At one point, I mentioned the spelling on the form, lightly, like it was a joke. "Oh," he said, "yeah, that happens. They'll fix it if it comes up." If it comes up. The way he said it suggested it probably wouldn't. I watched his face while he spoke. There was no defensiveness there, no irritation, just certainty. He believed this was fine. I believed him too. Or maybe I wanted to. The following week, a packet came home in my granddaughter's backpack. I helped her empty it on the table. Crayons rolled out. A half-finished drawing. Then a stapled bundle of papers with her name printed on the front. Below it, in smaller letters, was mine. Still wrong. I sat there with the packet open, the table quiet around me. I could hear the clock ticking in the other room. Ordinary sounds. A house that hadn't changed, even if something else had. I thought about correcting it, about picking up the phone, about saying calmly that there had been a mistake. Instead, I aligned the pages and slid them back into the backpack. I told myself I'd mention it later, that there would be time, that this wasn't the moment. As I zipped the bag closed, I felt something settle. Not sharply, not painfully, just firmly enough that I knew it would stay. It occurred to me then, not as a clear thought, but as a quiet understanding, that this hadn't started with the form. The form had just been where I'd noticed it. After that, I began to notice how often things arrived finished, not explained, not discussed, just placed in front of me like a plate already cleared. A calendar invite appeared on my phone for the school fundraiser. I don't remember agreeing to help, but my name was listed under volunteers. When I mentioned it to my son, he said, "I figured you wouldn't mind. You're good at that stuff." He said it kindly, almost like a compliment. I told him it was fine. At the fundraiser, I stood behind a folding table counting raffle tickets. Parents passed by, nodding politely. A few of them used my granddaughter's name, then added, "Your grandma's helping today." No one asked my name. I didn't offer it. There was a moment, mid-afternoon, when a woman from the school office came over with a clipboard. "I just need you to sign here," she said, pointing. I looked down before signing this time. The wrong name again. I hesitated, just long enough that she noticed. "Oh, that's just what we have in the system," she said quickly. "If it's wrong, you can email the office." I held the pen. The line waited. "I'll do that," I said. I signed anyway. Later, at home, I sat at the computer and opened a new email. I typed the office address carefully. I wrote my name at the top, spelled correctly, and then I stared at the blank space beneath it. I thought about how to explain the mistake without sounding fussy. I rewrote the first sentence 3 times. Then I deleted the whole thing and closed the laptop. I told myself I'd send it tomorrow. Tomorrow became next week. The days filled in with other things. Pickups, meals, little errands done out of habit. I moved through them easily, like someone who knew the routine well enough not to question it. But something in me had started keeping track. It was small things at first. A note sent home asking for permission that had already been signed. A doctor's appointment scheduled without asking if I was available, then shifted slightly when I said I wasn't. "Don't worry," my son would say. "I already told them you're flexible." Flexible. That word followed me around more than my name did. One evening, I mentioned it. Again, lightly. Again, like it didn't really matter. That I might not always be free on short notice. He looked surprised. "Well," he said, "you usually are." He wasn't wrong. That was the problem. I'd made a habit of being available, of smoothing things over. of stepping in quietly when I was needed and stepping back just as quietly when I wasn't asked. It had worked for a long time. It had made me useful. It had made things easier for everyone else. The school sent out an email about emergency contacts. My son was listed first, then his wife, then under additional, my name misspelled, along with my phone number. I read it twice. Something about seeing myself placed there, under a heading that sounded optional, made my throat tighten. Not dramatically, just enough that I swallowed once and felt it pass. That night, I opened the old folder again, the one with the important papers. I took out my ID and laid it on the table. I placed it next to the school packet from earlier in the week. Correct name, incorrect name. Side by side, it was obvious. I realized then that no one else had a reason to notice. The mistake didn't inconvenience them. It didn't slow anything down. It fit neatly into the system. Except for me, I thought about correcting it, about insisting, about asking why I hadn't been shown the form before it was submitted. But each of those thoughts was followed by another, quicker one. It's not worth the discomfort. It'll sound petty. You're making more of it than it is. Those second thoughts had always been reliable. They'd kept things smooth for years. Now they felt rehearsed. At school pickup one afternoon, I stood with the other grandparents near the gate. A man next to me introduced himself and asked which child was mine. My granddaughter, I said. He smiled and told me her name. He said it wrong at first, then stopped and corrected himself. I appreciated that more than I expected. When I told him my name, he repeated it carefully, like he meant to remember it. Nice to meet you, he said. I drove home thinking about that small exchange, about how it had felt to be heard without having to insist. A week later, the school called. I missed it the first time. When I returned the call, the woman on the line asked for me by the wrong name. I corrected her. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said right away. "I'll update that." I could hear her typing while we spoke. That should be fixed now. I hung up and sat there with the phone still in my hand. The fix had taken less than a minute. No explanation, no pushback, just a simple acknowledgement. I wondered why I hadn't done it sooner. That question stayed with me longer than I expected. At dinner that night, I mentioned the call. "They had my name wrong in the system," I said. "I corrected it." My son looked up briefly. "Good," he said. "That happens." Then he went back to his food. Something shifted then. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a quiet recognition that how easily he accepted the correction now didn't erase the fact that I hadn't been included before. I thought about all the times I'd been told things after they were decided, how often I'd nodded, how natural that had felt. I started to see a pattern, not cruelty, not intention, just assumption. Assumptions grow best when no one interrupts them. The next school event was a parent-teacher conference. My son told me the time and said he'd pick me up. "I can drive myself," I said. He paused. "Sure," he said. "Whatever you prefer." The words were neutral. The pause wasn't. At the conference, the teacher greeted us by name. Correctly, both of us. She spoke mostly to my son, but when she asked questions, she looked at me. She waited for my answers. It wasn't remarkable. It wasn't special. It was just respectful. On the way out, my son said, "I didn't realize you wanted to be that involved." I thought about that before answering. "I've always been involved," I said, "just not always asked." He nodded, slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize either. That was fine. I wasn't asking for that. What I wanted, what I was starting to understand I needed, was something else. Space, not distance, not silence, just room to be present without being absorbed. In the weeks that followed, I practiced small things. Saying I'd check my calendar instead of answering right away. Asking to see information before it was submitted. Correcting my name when it was wrong calmly, without explanation. Each one felt a little unfamiliar. Like using a muscle I hadn't needed in a long time. No one objected. No one pushed back. That, more than anything, told me how unnecessary my earlier silence had been. One afternoon, while helping my granddaughter with homework, she wrote my name at the top of the page. She spelled it correctly. "I asked Dad," she said, noticing me look. I wanted to make sure. I smiled and thanked her. She went back to her work like it was nothing. I sat there longer than I needed to, watching her write. The letters careful, intentional. It became clear to me then, not suddenly, but steadily, that the thing I'd been carrying wasn't really about a form. It was about how easily I'd stepped aside, and how quietly I'd taught others to expect that. Once you see that, it's hard not to wonder how many other moments you've smoothed over without meaning to. The school sent another packet home near the end of the year. Schedules, permissions, end of term details. I spread it out on the table like I always did. This time, I checked the first page before anything else. My name was spelled correctly. It shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. By then, it had already been fixed, more than once. This wasn't new. Still, I sat there with it longer than necessary. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't pride. It was confirmation. Later that week, my son asked if I could watch my granddaughter overnight. He said it casually, but this time he added, "If you're free." I didn't answer right away. I checked my calendar, not to make a point. I actually checked. I saw the dinner I'd planned with a friend, one I'd already postponed twice. "I can't that night," I said, "but I can the next one." He hesitated, just for a moment. "Okay," he said, "that works." That was it. No disappointment to manage. No explanation needed. Nothing collapsed. After we hung up, I noticed my hands were steady. That surprised me. I'd expected some leftover tension, a sense of having done something risky. Instead, I felt normal. That became the pattern. Small decisions said plainly. Information asked for, not assumed. Corrections made when needed, without apology. Not everything changed, Some habits were deeply set. My son still moved quickly, still finalized things before talking them through. That was who he was. I wasn't trying to undo that. What changed was how I showed up. When another form came home needing signatures, I asked to see it first. He handed it over without comment. I read it carefully. My name was right. The details were accurate. I signed. At the bottom of the page, there was a line for additional authorized guardians. My name was there too, correctly. I didn't point it out. I didn't say anything at all. I just handed the paper back. A few weeks later, the school called again. This time, they asked for me by name. They needed consent for a small schedule change. My son couldn't be reached, and I was listed as the next contact. I gave permission, calmly, without hesitation. When I told him later, he said, "Good. I'm glad they called you." So was I. The old folder stayed in the drawer. I didn't open it as often. I didn't need the reminder anymore. The present had started to match the record. One afternoon, I cleaned out my email inbox. Old messages, notifications that didn't matter anymore. As I scrolled, I noticed how many school emails were addressed to me directly now. Not forwarded, not added as an afterthought. That hadn't happened by accident, and it hadn't required a confrontation either. No long talk, no emotional accounting. Just a few moments where I chose not to smooth things over. I thought back to the first form, the way I'd flattened it with my hand, the way I'd signed without comment. How natural that had felt then. I understood it better now. That instinct hadn't come from weakness. It had come from years of keeping things running, of making space, of believing harmony depended on my quiet agreement. That belief had served me once. It didn't anymore. Near the end of the school year, my granddaughter brought home a class project. A family tree, drawn in pencil, colored carefully, everyone labeled. When she showed it to me, she watched my face. "That's you," she said, pointing. I spelled it right. I laughed softly. "You did," she shrugged. To her, it was obvious. Settled. That night, after she went to bed, I stood at the counter with the paper laid out in front of me. My name sat there in her handwriting. A little uneven, completely correct. I realized then that what I'd been reclaiming wasn't just for me. It was modeling something. Not control, not authority, just presence that didn't need to be negotiated after the fact. The last school document of the year came by email. A summary, attendance, contacts, guardians. I read it once. Then I closed the laptop. There was nothing to fix. That's how I knew the story had shifted. Not dramatically, not publicly, but in a way that wouldn't slip back unnoticed. I still smooth papers flat sometimes. Old habits linger, but I read them now. And if my name is wrong, I correct it. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Support these stories so they reach those who need to hear them.